The winter of 1990 was a slow, painful drawing of a final, ragged breath. I closed my eyes in the small, frigid room, the air thick with the smell of cheap burning wood. My own breath, a faint white plume in the gloom, was slowly fading. There was no peace in this quietus, only the acid taste of a life utterly wasted. Then her voice came to me not as a memory, but as a fresh poison dripping into my ear. Clara, Leo's younger sister. Her sweet, sickly tone, the one she used when she knew her words would cut deepest, echoed down the hollow corridor of my mind, as clearly as it had that day on Oak Lane. "You still don't know, do you?" she had whispered, her eyes alight with malicious glee. "My brother sent less money home because he's already been with your best friend, Isabel. Their son is 3 years old now." The sentence, a perfectly sharpened dagger, had pierced straight through my breastbone, leaving not a searing pain but a profound, terrifying numbness. For years I had carried the burdens of the entire Walsh family. I had raised Leo's younger siblings, I had spoon-fed his ailing father until the old man's last rattling breath, I had broken my back on their stubborn patch of land. All of it a patient, grueling vigil waiting for Leo to return to me. Yet while my spine was curving under the weight of his obligations, he was quietly building a home, a life, a son with the woman I had once called a sister. In my final moment no tears fell. They had all been spent long ago. Only a cold, vast emptiness consumed me, swallowing the last flicker of my warmth. Then I opened my eyes. Not to darkness but to a blistering midsummer sun. A pounding headache, familiar and vicious, made me wince. Out of reflex I raised a hand to massage my temple and then I froze. The hand was younger, the skin calloused but not yet gnarled with the years. My eyes flew open. Around me were the familiar cracked clay walls of the side room in the Walsh household. Spiderwebs draped the corners like tattered lace. A rickety table with a missing leg stood propped against the wall. This wasn't the cold room of my death. This was 1987. The realization didn't come gently. It slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This was the day. The day Leo had personally escorted the remains of Thomas, Isabel's husband, his closest comrade, back to the village. While I had been forced by my mother-in-law, Eleanor, to cut pig grass in the scorching sun, I had collapsed from heatstroke and rolled down the hill, only to be carried back by pitying villagers an hour later. The memory of my past life was a searing brand on my soul. In that timeline, the moment I woke, Eleanor had stormed in and ordered me, dizzy and weak, into the kitchen to cook dinner, while Leo stayed at Isabel's house, playing the grieving, supportive friend, accepting condolences from the villagers. As if on cue, the door burst open. Useless wretch. Eleanor Walsh stood there, a firewood stick clenched in her meaty hand, her face a mask of contempt. "Get up and cook. Or do you think I'm here to serve you?" In my past life I had struggled to my feet, my vision swimming, and obeyed. I had cooked the meal and in the end they hadn't even left me a cold scrap of bread. But now, a cold, unfamiliar smile curled at the corner of my lips. If heaven or some cruel twist of fate had given me a second chance, why should I bow my head again? I looked her dead in the eye. "Cook it yourself." Eleanor froze, her jaw going slack with sheer, unadulterated shock. Then her face twisted into a purpled rage. "What did you say?" The stick whistled as she swung it down toward me. A new instinct, born of decades of repressed fury, shot through me. My hand snapped out, seizing the stick midair. I sat up straight, my grip like iron, and looked her dead in the eye, enunciating each word with a clarity that made her flinch. "Don't have hands of your own, you insolent brat." Her face was ashen. She tried to yank the stick back, but I held tight, my icy gaze stripping her of her bravado. She instinctively released her grip, stumbling back a step. "Fine. Fine," she spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "Just wait until Leo gets home. Let's see how he'll deal with you." I tossed the stick at her feet with a snort of derision. It clattered on the hard-packed earth. She flinched, glared at me one last time, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the clay walls seemed to shudder. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. I stared at my own calloused palms, my thoughts swirling like a storm. Clara's words from my deathbed still echoed, a ghostly refrain. Their son is already 3 years old. 3 years. Which meant the child growing in Isabel's belly now, the one everyone believed was a posthumous blessing for the fallen Thomas, could only be Leo's. A chilling thought, more terrifying than any blow from Eleanor, crystallized in my mind. Was Thomas's death truly just an accident on a routine training exercise? If fate had granted me this life, this weapon of foreknowledge, then Leo and Isabel, they would learn the meaning of the retribution I would bring. When night fell, Leo finally returned. I was sitting on the edge of the hard bed, counting the meager stash of money I had painstakingly saved over the years, coin by coin. At the sound of his footsteps in the yard, I quickly hid it inside my clothes. The performance began immediately. Outside, Eleanor's voice rose in a theatrical wail. "Leo, finally you're home. If you hadn't come back, your mother would have been bullied to death by that wretched woman." The footsteps, firm and authoritative, approached my door and stopped. I straightened my threadbare clothes, sat up properly and looked calmly toward the entrance, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. The door swung open and his tall frame blocked the doorway. His army uniform was crisp, his captain's insignia gleaming even in the dim light. His eyes, which I had once found so compelling, were sharp and icy, his face as cold as a frost-bitten field. "So," his voice was low, a controlled rumble. "You talk back to my mother today?" In my past life, just the sight of him like this, the weight of his disapproval, was enough to make me tremble and stammer. But now, all I could see was the falseness of him, the carefully constructed facade of the honorable soldier. I lifted my head, deliberately dragging out my tone, lacing it with a sarcasm he had never heard from me before. "Oh, the great Captain Leo Walsh actually remembers his way home." His brows knitted in surprise, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. He strode inside, closing the distance between us. He carried with him the mingled scents of tobacco and a faint, floral perfume. Isabel's scent. My stomach turned. "What's with that attitude?" he demanded. "What attitude?" I threw the words back at him, not bothering to hide my glare. "I collapsed from heatstroke and your mother still forced me to cook." I lay down to rest for a moment and she accused me of talking back. "Leo," I said, my voice dropping, "ask yourself honestly, how have I treated your family these past 2 years?" Eleanor, who had been lurking behind him, immediately cut in, her voice shrill. "Leo, don't listen to her lies. Look at her. She's always been lazy. On your wedding night you had to return to the unit. She's never been a proper wife." I interrupted her, raising my hand and counting off on my fingers, each point a hammer blow on the anvil of his conscience. "Your father was bedridden for 2 years. Who was the one bathing him? Feeding him? When he passed away, where were you?" I handled the entire funeral alone. Leo's expression shifted, a crack in the icy exterior. "At the time, my unit had a mission." "Mission?" I laughed, a short, cold sound that had no humor in it. "What about the money you sent home every month?" "I never saw a single cent of it. It all went into your mother's pocket. 6 acres of farmland. I plowed and harvested every bit myself. School fees, books, clothes and shoes for your younger siblings. Which of those did I not pay for?" Eleanor shot up, furious, ready to lunge at me. "You insolent brat. How dare you lie like that?" Leo held her back, his frown deepening. "Mother, is what Maya said true? She's making it up." Eleanor's face flushed a blotchy red. "Didn't I use that money to buy medicine for your father? Or do you think a sick man doesn't need money?" I sneered, pressing my advantage. "Oh yes, medicine for your father. But he's been dead for 3 months now. What? Did you burn all that money to send down to the underworld for him to spend?" The room fell into a stunned silence. A vein bulged on Leo's temple. He looked from my defiant face to his mother's panicked one, and the truth was as plain as day. Suddenly he turned to Eleanor and spoke in a hard, unyielding voice. "From now on, half of my allowance goes directly to Maya." "What?" Eleanor froze as if struck by lightning. "Leo, have you lost your mind?" "That's enough," he snapped, his voice cutting through her protests. He dragged his mother, who was still hurling curses at me, out of the room. Before leaving, he cast me one long, unreadable look, a mixture of anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. After they were gone, the strength drained from my body and I sank back onto the bed. From under the lumpy pillow, I pulled out a small, cheap notebook and a stub of a pencil. This was the ledger I had started the moment my memories returned. Every coin I spent on the Walsh family, every chore I did for them, I wrote it all down. In my past life I had been far too foolish, believing that silent sacrifice was its own reward. Isabel and I used to be inseparable, closer than sisters. We slept in the same bed, shared every secret. She used to comb my hair and I embroidered the delicate patterns on her wedding dress for Thomas. The memory rose, unbidden and painful. That day the sun was bright, the sky a dazzling, cruel blue. Isabel carried a bamboo basket, smiling radiantly as she invited me. Maya, let's go catch fish in the river. Tonight I'll make you a nourishing soup. By the riverbank she suddenly slipped and screamed, clutching at my sleeve. I hurried to pull her back, but instead she used my arm for leverage and shoved me with all her strength into the deep, churning water. The icy current swallowed me whole in an instant. As I struggled, choking, to resurface, I saw her standing on the bank. Her eyes looked mournful, but her mouth was set in a hard line. "Help me, Isabel, please." I flailed desperately, my cries gurgling into nothing. She didn't call for help. She simply turned her back and ran away. When I regained consciousness, the first thing I saw was Leo's angular face above me, his entire body soaked, his brows furrowed in what I mistook for concern. "Comrade, are you all right?" Around us, the villagers crowded close, whispering and watching the commotion. Whispers rippled through the crowd non-stop. "Oh my God, they're hugging. Old man Walsh must be crying tears of joy. Should keep it down. The Walsh boy already has a fiancée. It's Isabel." It was Isabel who had pushed me into the water. Clinging to Leo's wet uniform, I sobbed and cried out my accusation. His expression instantly shifted from concern to alarm. He pressed his warm, firm hand over my mouth. "Don't talk nonsense," he hissed, his voice dropping dangerously low. "This can't be said carelessly." That night my own parents, who saw me as a burden, stormed into the Walsh household with sticks. My father kicked over the clothes rack and my mother wailed in the middle of the yard. "My daughter's reputation is ruined. Who will have her now?" Leo stood in the shadows of the main hall. Under the pressure of scandal he finally nodded. "I'll marry her." I hadn't even wanted to. I knew it was a sham. But later that night he came to me. His face under the moonlight looked as though it were carved from ice. "Marry me," he said, "and you'll be free from that house forever." His gaze swept across the fresh bruises on my wrist, the ones left by my parents when they had tied me up, preparing to sell me off to a much older man in the next village to fund my younger brother's marriage. In that moment of utter desperation I wavered. Leo was salvation to me then, even if I knew he was only trying to silence me to protect Isabel. I still, fool that I was, felt a spark of gratitude. After being reborn, I had even thought for a fleeting moment that if he truly loved Isabel I would step aside. But he shouldn't have. He absolutely shouldn't have. He made me work like a beast of burden for his family, draining my youth and spirit, while he lived sweetly with Isabel, playing house with my best friend. The candle before me suddenly went out, snuffed by a cold draft from the broken window. I jolted awake from my bitter memories. Outside voices rose again. The sound of Leo and his mother arguing in the yard. Holding my breath, I peered through a crack in the window shutter. Leo stood beneath the gnarled apple tree, his expression stormy. "You gave her half? Are you insane?" Eleanor hissed, her voice carrying clearly in the still night. "Mother, keep your voice down," he said through clenched teeth. "Do you want the entire village to know how you've mistreated Maya? What sin did I commit to have such an unfilial son?" Eleanor collapsed to the ground in a practiced dramatic gesture, slapping her thighs. "I raised you bit by bit and now you're married and you forget your own mother." Leo turned, the collar of his uniform looking tight around his neck. His gaze drifted, almost involuntarily, toward the silhouette of Isabel's house in the distance before he spoke again. His voice was low but I could just catch it. "When father was bedridden for more than 10 years, who fed him, cleaned him? When your little brother cried from hunger, who starved herself so you could keep studying?" Eleanor grew more agitated the more she spoke. "Now that you've made something of yourself, you plan to give half to that woman? She's our daughter-in-law. If people say I mistreat her, how can you still be a captain?" Leo's jaw tightened, the muscles twitching. Just then Clara, now 15 and blossoming into a sharp-faced copy of her mother, rushed out of the house, her face full of defiance. "I don't agree with sharing money with her." Then Liam, only 10, came running after her, deliberately raising his voice so I would hear. "We want Isabel to be our sister-in-law. Last time she even bought us malted milk." A cold laugh escaped me. Two ungrateful wretches. In my past life, I had pinched every penny to feed and educate them, while I, at 25, was already haggard and worn, my back permanently bent, my face etched with lines far beyond my years. In this life, though I had only been married into the Walsh family for 2 years, I had willingly shouldered all the housework out of that misplaced gratitude, never once making them lift a finger. Just look at Clara now, plump and fair, no trace of the skinny, sickly girl she once was. Liam, once dark and scrawny, had grown into a sturdy boy. And yet, a single box of malted milk was enough for Isabel to buy their hearts. Truly thankless creatures, raised only to bite the hand that fed them. "Shut up!" Leo suddenly roared, his voice echoing across the quiet yard. "If anyone dares say such things again, don't blame me for turning against you." Eleanor choked on her words. Clara and Liam went pale with fright. Inside I laughed coldly to myself. He truly loved her. He really couldn't bear to let even a single whisper about Isabel slip out. His protectiveness of her was a physical force. "Fine," he bit out, his voice hard. "The money stays as we decided." As soon as he finished speaking, his eyes flipped, almost imperceptibly, toward the window of my room. My heart pounded and I slipped behind the door, pressing myself flat against the wall. Only when the sound of his footsteps faded into the night did I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I climbed onto the hard bed, the rough sheets scratching my skin. Lying there in the oppressive darkness, I thought back to my past life. God, I had been such a fool. Back then, I naively believed Leo was a victim too, tricked by a manipulative Isabel. After all, she had married before me grandly to Thomas, Leo's closest comrade. I still remembered the day Leo learned that Isabel was getting married. His face had gone pale as steel. He stood under the eaves, fists clenched so tight the veins turned white, rain dripping from his chin. So Isabel had already been seeing Thomas. The Croft family was the wealthiest in the village, and Thomas was handsome, smooth-tongued, skilled at charming women. To cast Leo aside openly, Isabel hadn't hesitated to stage the river accident and let me carry the shame in her place. Leo, I thought into the silent night, my resolve hardening into something cold and unbreakable. If you loved her that much, then I'll grant you the chance to be with her. But it will be on my terms. It will be in the ashes of everything you hold dear. This time I would not be the victim. This time I would be the storm. The first light of dawn found me already awake, my body thrumming with a purpose I hadn't felt in either lifetime. The memory of my death was a cold ember in my gut, but it was the memory of my life, the wasted years, the silent suffering, that fanned it into a blaze. I could hear the household stirring. Eleanor was moving around the kitchen with more noise than necessary, a symphony of slammed pots and muttered curses meant for my ears. In my past life, this sound would have sent me scrambling, my heart pounding with anxiety. Today I stayed seated on the edge of my bed, methodically braiding my hair. Let her rage. The power dynamic in this house had shifted and I was the one who had moved it. After Leo left for the day, presumably to continue his comforting duties at the Croft household, I kicked open the door to the main room. Eleanor, Clara, and Liam were huddled around a small bowl of congee. They looked up, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resentment. "Before the sun sets," I said, my voice flat and carrying, "I want 2 bundles of pig grass cut and stacked by the shed." Eleanor gawked at me, a piece of pickled radish falling from her chopsticks. "Are you insane? You dare order me to cut pig grass?" Smack. The sound of my palm connecting with her cheek was sharp, a satisfying crack that echoed in the small room. It was the first time I had ever struck her. The shock in her eyes was a balm to my soul. Clara shot up from her stool, her hand raised to strike me back. "Paya, how dare you hit Mother?" I didn't waste words. I swung around and slapped her hard across the face. She froze, staring at me in utter disbelief. After all, I had been the one who doted on her the most, who had stayed up late mending her dresses, who had given her the larger portion of my food. Grabbing the firewood stick she had tried to use on me yesterday, I lashed it across her calf. "From today," I announced, my gaze sweeping over all 3 of them, "you're in charge of cooking and laundry." I pointed the stick at Liam. "You the fields. If either of you slacks off, I tapped the stick against my palm, the threat hanging in the air. I'll deal with you myself. Margaret still tried to hold her ground, refusing to move, her face a mottled red. I didn't waste words. Snatching up the heavy wooden rolling pin from the kitchen counter, I brought it down across her back. The yelp she let out was pure agony. The tricks I'd learned from the old village doctor in my past life, the knowledge of pressure points and how to strike for maximum pain while leaving minimal marks, finally came in handy. That evening they all huddled in a corner, quietly wiping their tears as I ate my meal in peace at the table. The congee was watery and badly salted, Clara's first attempt at cooking. I ate every bite. It was only fair they experienced the hunger and incompetence I had endured in my last life. The next morning, true to form, they all marched to the village committee to accuse me. I followed them at a distance, my steps steady. When we reached the courtyard of the office, I didn't wait for their rehearsed lies. I dropped to the ground, the dust puffing up around me, and let out a wail that would have made Eleanor proud. Heavens, how unjust! I cried, beating my fists against the hard earth. I've served the Walsh family all these years. The one time I fall ill and make them do a little work, they drag me here to be punished. Secretary Jiang, the head of the local party branch, frowned, his kind face creased with concern. Maya, if you really beat your mother-in-law and siblings-in-law like this. Secretary Jiang. I cut him off, my voice cracking with feigned emotion. I yanked open the high collar of my tunic, revealing the long faded but still visible purple bruise across my collarbone. This was from last year when my mother-in-law beat me with the fire tongs. Where were you then? I didn't give him a chance to respond. I rolled up my sleeve, showing the dense, shadowy bruises from old fingernail grips. These are her handprints. For 2 years. This is how I've lived in the Walsh household. The villagers who had gathered began murmuring noisily, their sympathies shifting visibly. Eleanor's face went from red to white to a sickly green. Clara and Liam glared at me, their eyes blazing with a mixture of shame and fury. You really want to take charge, don't you? Eleanor finally spat out. I swiped away a non-existent tear. Fine. If I'm such a burden, I'll send them all back to your house, Secretary Jiang. Let's see if your family can feed them. I made a move to grab Eleanor's arm. Secretary Jiang waved his hands in a panic. Enough. Enough. Family matters should be resolved at home. Do not air your dirty laundry in public. I gave a cold laugh, turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them sputtering in my wake. I tossed one last warning over my shoulder. If the pig grass isn't cut by dinner time, don't expect a single bite of rice. As the sun set that day, I sprawled across the hard Kong bed, legs crossed, slowly gnawing on a handful of sunflower seeds I'd found hidden in Eleanor's room. The sound of their reluctant labor from outside was a sweet melody. In my past life they had drained me dry. In this one I'd make them learn what it meant to live a life worse than death. Half a month later, the village gossip mill was churning. Whispers spread that Isabel had been assigned work in the army. Supposedly, a special unit had arranged a position for her, a compassionate gesture for a martyr's widow. Under the elm tree at the edge of the village, the gossiping women clucked with excitement. Well, she is a martyr's widow, one said. The organization has to take care of her. I stood behind the tree, a cold smile tugging at my lips, my fingers tracing the handle of the sickle tucked into my belt. Clara's dying whispers from my past life echoed in my ears, clearer than the women's chatter. Isabel went to the unit herself to find my brother. He was soft-hearted and kept her. Later, the leaders arranged the match and the unit even held the wedding. You never knew, did you? My brother never filed a marriage certificate with the unit. You were never officially considered the Walsh family's wife. The sickle in my grip felt like an extension of my own rage. I slammed the flat of the blade against the tree trunk, scattering sawdust. Well done. From the very beginning, this marriage had been nothing but a trap, a fraud laid against me. In my past life I had been thoroughly deceived. When his superiors praised him for being a man of loyalty and righteousness, for taking care of a martyr's widow, did he ever once remember that back home he had a wife repaying his family's debts in his name? Sister-in-law. I turned. Clara stood a short distance away, her arm still mottled with bruises from the other day. She looked timid, a far cry from the defiant girl she'd been. Mother told me to ask if you'd cut the pig grass tonight. I fixed her with a stare that made her flinch. Say one more word, I snapped, And you'll go hungry tonight. She scrambled up and ran without a backward glance. I couldn't help but recall her graduation in my past life, walking hand in hand with Isabel, smiling radiantly at her classmates. "This is my sister-in-law," she had said, linking arms with the woman who had destroyed me. Should I really have saved such an ungrateful wretch that day? My eyes narrowed as I looked toward the distant county seat, a cold smile playing on my lips. It was time. Time to visit the army unit. I would ask in front of every superior, was Maya truly Leo Walsh's wife or not? I would see Leo and Isabel ruined, their reputations crushed in the one place his honor mattered most. "Leo, and you still dared to dream of promotion?" I thought. Daydreaming. The sunset bled across the alley behind the school, painting the wall like fresh blood. I crouched in the shadows, fiddling with the sickle in my hand. Around this time in my past life, Clara had been late returning from school. Worried, I had gone to find her and stumbled upon a gang of thugs trying to assault her. I hadn't hesitated. I charged in, fists flying, but two hands couldn't fight four. I shielded her with my body as their blows rained down. Blood had spilled from the corner of my mouth, and the sight of it scared the thugs into fleeing after hurling curses. The moment they were gone, Clara had shoved me aside and bolted without a backward glance. I dragged my battered body to the clinic and dressed my own wounds. By the time I returned home, the night was pitch black. The second I opened the door, a porcelain cup flew straight at my face. "Where the hell have you been?" Eleanor had stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips. No dinner on the stove. Planning to starve the whole family. Clara had been curled up in the corner, and the instant her eyes met my blood-stained face, she had quickly looked away. Later that night, when the house was silent, she had crept into my room. "Sister-in-law," she had whispered, twisting the hem of her shirt, her voice as faint as a mosquito's buzz. "Please don't tell anyone about what happened today. If it gets out." She had suddenly dropped to her knees. "If this gets out, my life is over." From afar, footsteps echoed in a messy rhythm. I lifted my head. Sure enough, 3 familiar figures were approaching. Leading them was a blonde thug with a cigarette dangling from his lips. It was the same gang of hooligans from my past life. "You all heard me," he said. "That girl passes here at this time every day. They say her brother's a soldier. So what? If she dares scream, we'll deal with it later." Clara came strolling down the alley, humming a tune, oblivious. "Hey there, pretty girl. Where you headed?" The blonde flicked his cigarette and reached out to touch her face. Startled, she stumbled back against the brick wall. "My brother's a captain in the army." "A soldier's sister, huh?" The gang roared with laughter, grabbing her arm to drag her deeper into the alley. "All the more reason we should take good care of you." I slipped closer, silent as a shadow. The icy blade of my sickle pressed against the blonde's throat. "Having fun, kid?" I whispered into his ear. "Then let me play too." His body froze, the cigarette dropping onto his shoe. "No fun here, ma'am. Just a misunderstanding." His face turned chalk white as he trembled. Clara seized the chance to break free, rushing behind me, clutching my sleeve, sobbing. "Quit crying," I barked without even turning my head. "See that pole against the wall? Grab it and beat those 2 for me." The other thugs tried to bolt, but I pressed the sickle harder against the leader's neck. A thin line of blood welled up. He collapsed to the ground, a wet stain spreading between his legs. "Move," I said softly, "and you're dead." At first Clara shook with fear. But when the pole cracked against one thug's knee and his screams filled the alley, her eyes lit up with a feral gleam. She swung the pole wildly, blow after blow, releasing all her pent-up fear and frustration on them. When it was over, I dragged the blonde by the scruff of his neck straight to the police station. On the way back, Clara trailed after me, hesitating to speak. At the elm tree at the edge of the village, she suddenly quickened her pace and whispered so softly it was almost lost in the night. "Sister-in-law, thank you." I froze. In my past life, hearing gratitude from her had been harder than reaching the heavens. When she was admitted to college, she thanked her brother. When I stayed up late sewing her a new dress, she complained it was ugly. When she was sick and I carried her to the clinic, she wailed that I walked too slow. I shook her hand off my sleeve. If it had been anyone else, I would have saved them too. I kept walking. She stood rooted behind me, the moonlight casting over her swollen, tear-streaked face. She couldn't understand. She couldn't understand why the sister-in-law, who had always been so tolerant and silent, had suddenly become so hard, so merciless, and yet had still saved her. As I passed the grain-drying yard, I heard the faint sound of her sobbing behind me. In my past life, on this very night, I had lain battered and bruised on the bed while she hid in her room, eating the malt candy her mother had bought for her. At dawn, I slung a cloth bag over my shoulder and slipped out of the Walsh household. Maya, off so early. Where are you going? Aunt Zhang, who sold tofu at the village entrance, poked her head out. I curved my lips into a smile and raised my voice deliberately. I'm going back to my parents for a few days. I shook the bag in my hand for emphasis. Several early risers heard me clearly. By noon, word would certainly reach the Walsh family, giving me the cover I needed. At last, I squeezed onto the grimy, crowded green train, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The scenery outside the window began to slide backward, the familiar village giving way to fields and then to the outskirts of the city. From inside my clothes, I pulled out the letter, the final one Thomas had sent home before he died. The paper had grown soft and thin from my constant handling. After being reborn, I remembered Clara's words. Isabel and Leo already had a 3-year-old son. Counting back, that meant the child had been conceived before Thomas died. So the baby in Isabel's belly was Leo's all along. Was Thomas's death truly an accident? With the mindset of testing my luck, I had gone to the post office to ask after the funeral. To my surprise, it had worked. I pulled out the Croft family's household registry, one I had secretly taken during the chaos of Thomas's funeral, and with it I successfully received the letter. Humming softly, I tapped my fingers cheerfully against the paper. Leo, Leo, I thought, a thrill coursing through me. I truly cannot wait to see your face at the unit. The train clattered on, each turn of the wheels carrying me further from the suffocating confines of the village and closer to the heart of Leo's world. I clutched the cloth bag on my lap, my fingers tracing the outline of Thomas's letter through the rough fabric. It was my weapon, my key to unraveling the carefully constructed lie they had built their lives upon. The city, when I arrived, was a cacophony of sounds and smells that were both alien and thrilling. Bicycles weaved through traffic, their bells ringing incessantly. The air smelled of coal dust, frying oil, and something else, possibility. I didn't allow myself to be intimidated. The fear that had once ruled me had been burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hardened resolve. I found a cheap inn near the station, a single room with a narrow bed and a cracked wash basin. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the small window watching the city lights and rehearsed what I would say. I wasn't here as a pleading wife. I was here as an accuser. I was here as justice. The next morning I washed my face in the cold water, put on my cleanest though still faded tunic and trousers and set out for the army compound. The morning mist veiled the gates and the red flag above fluttered proudly, a symbol of the order and discipline Leo had so blatantly betrayed. Straightening my shoulders, I walked up to the young soldier on guard duty. He stood ramrod straight, his uniform impeccable. "Comrade," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "I'm here to see Captain Leo Walsh of the 3rd Regiment." The guard looked me over from head to toe, his eyes lingering on my patched trousers and worn cloth shoes. "And you are? What is your business with Captain Walsh?" I took a shallow breath. "I'm his wife." My voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear and carried in the crisp morning air. The guard's professional demeanor faltered for a second, replaced by open suspicion. "Do you have a marriage certificate?" he asked, frowning. My grip tightened on the bag in my hand, my knuckles turning white. This was the first hurdle. He never gave it to me. The admission, true as it was, made me sound like a fool, a country bumpkin being brushed off. I saw the doubt solidify in his eyes. But just then a green Jeep rolled up to the gate. The window lowered, revealing a man in his 50s with a stern, lined face and the insignia of a senior political officer on his collar. "What's going on here, soldier?" he asked, his voice deep and authoritative. "Report, Commissar." The guard snapped a salute. "This woman claims to be Captain Smith's wife." "Commissar." My ticket inside, opened the door and stepped out. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned me. He didn't see the patches first. He saw my posture, the directness of my gaze. His voice when he spoke to me was surprisingly gentle. "Are you Captain Walsh's fiancée?" "Not his fiancée." I lifted my head and met his eyes squarely, allowing a tremor to enter my voice, a calculated show of vulnerability. His wife. We've been married for 2 years. The commissar's expression turned grave at once. The lack of a certificate, my obvious poverty, the sheer audacity of my claim, it all added up to a story he knew could be deeply damaging. Seizing the moment, I dabbed at the corners of my eyes with my sleeve. If you don't believe me, ask around in Pine Creek Village. Everyone knows. Back then, after he pulled me from the river in front of the whole village, he was forced to marry me. Don't cry, the commissar said, his voice softening further. He handed me a clean white handkerchief. It smelled of soap and sunshine. Come with me. Tell me everything. The jeep rolled past the training ground. The sound of shouted orders and a distant bugle call echoed across the compound. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leo, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling over me. I'm here. I'm looking forward to this reunion. In the commissar's office, I was offered a seat and a mug of hot tea. The enamel cup was warm in my hands, the tea leaves slowly settling to the bottom like the facts I was about to lay bare. I held the mug, took a steadying breath and began to speak. I was careful, methodical. I wasn't a hysterical woman. I was a witness giving a deposition. We married 2 years ago. On our wedding night, he claimed there was an urgent mission. He didn't even step inside the bridal chamber before rushing off. I let the hurt show in my voice, the public humiliation of that night. Last year, when my father-in-law died, I sent 3 telegrams in a row. My fingers traced the chipped rim of the cup. Even on the day of the funeral, he never came home. Smoke curled thick in the air as the commissar lit a cigarette. His face darkened with every word I spoke. This time, I paused deliberately, watching his reaction. He only returned to escort. I let the sentence hang for a beat. The remains of Comrade Thomas Croft back to his village. And the very next morning, he left again. I raised my tear-filled eyes to the commissar, letting him see the profound confusion and betrayal. I came today to ask him just one thing. If he hated me so much, why did he insist on marrying me? Suddenly, hurried, heavy footsteps sounded outside the door. I lowered my head, the corner of my lips curling in a secret smile. No one saw. You finally came. Report. His familiar voice carried a nervous edge I had never heard before. The commissar slammed his cigarette into the ashtray, grinding it down with clenched teeth. Leo, get in here. The door was pushed open. The moment his eyes met mine, his gaze contracted sharply, a flash of pure panic that he quickly masked. He straightened his back, the perfect soldier. Commissar. Is this your wife? The commissar pointed a trembling finger at me. Leo's eyes darted from my face to the commissar's furious one. He swallowed hard. Yes, he said, his voice hoarse. But commissar, there's a misunderstanding. The porcelain ashtray whizzed past his temple and shattered against the wall behind him, pieces scattering across the floor. The commissar's furious roar shook the glass panes in the window. Married for 2 years and never reported it. And you dare call that a misunderstanding? I seized the chance, stepping forward, tears now streaming freely down my cheeks as I stared straight at him. Back then you were the one who insisted on marrying me. Wasn't it because you were afraid I'd expose Isabel for pushing me into the river? Leo's face went ashen. Maya, what nonsense are you spouting? But his eyes kept darting nervously toward the commissar, betraying his terror. Nonsense. I enunciated each word, driving them home like nails. Leo, do you want me to bring out witnesses? I didn't wait for his answer. Who would have thought? Just a few days ago, I ran into little May, the village chief's daughter. I gave her a piece of candy, and she whispered that 2 years ago, while hiding in the reeds, she had seen with her own eyes Isabel pushing me into the water. Leo's knuckles turned white as his fists clenched, his entire arm trembling beneath the crisp sleeve of his uniform. The lie was unraveling before him and he was powerless to stop it. And this, I said, my voice rising, echoing through the entire floor, ensuring everyone outside could hear, is only the beginning. I want to report. The child in Isabel's belly is. Leo lunged at me, a strangled roar erupting from his throat. But 2 guards burst into the room and pinned him down before he could reach me. He thrashed violently, his face twisted with a rage I had never seen, his carefully maintained composure utterly shattered. Maya, shut your mouth. The commissar's eyes had narrowed to slits, his voice low and heavy with impending doom. "Comrade, accusations require proof." This was my moment. I pulled out the letter, the paper rustling ominously in the tense silence. "Please, Commissar, take a look. This is Thomas Croft's last letter home before he died." The Commissar took the letter, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. His eyes scanned the lines and I watched as the color drained from his face. Then a roar even more thunderous than the first erupted from him, so loud I felt it in my bones. The entire building seemed to stir. I could hear the scuffle of feet, doors opening, heads poking out from every office to see the source of the commotion. At last Leo truly panicked. "Commissar, this is slander." His eyes snapped back to me, filled with a venomous, pure hatred. "Maya, just you wait." But it was too late. The dam had broken. That afternoon the entire base was in upheaval. The news spread like wildfire, leaping from office to barracks, from mess hall to training field. The child in the martyr's widow's womb belonged to Captain Leo Walsh. Even more chilling, Comrade Thomas Croft's death might not have been an accident after all. The army moved with swift, brutal efficiency. An investigation was launched. Leo was confined to quarters, then stripped of his rank. The court-martial was a swift, quiet affair. I wasn't called to testify. The evidence, the letter, the timeline of the pregnancy, the testimonies gathered from the village about my marriage and Isabel's relationship with Leo, was damning enough. I stood at the gates of the compound on the day he was formally discharged. I watched him stumble out, a shabby duffel bag slung over his shoulder, containing the entirety of his military life. The pristine uniform was gone, replaced by a drab civilian suit that hung loosely on his frame. His beard was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. His back, once straight with pride, was now hunched, making him look like a broken old man at the end of his days. He saw me standing there. He stopped, his gaze burning into me with a hatred so profound it was almost a physical force. "Are you satisfied now?" he rasped, his voice raw. I smiled then, a brilliant, genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in 2 lifetimes. How could I not be? Just then Isabel, her belly swollen and obvious under her dress, came running from the family quarters. Leo, wait for me." He turned on her, all the fury and frustration he couldn't direct at me exploding outward. "Get lost," he snarled and shoved her away from him. She fell to the gravel path with a cry, clutching her stomach. A dark red stain began to spread quickly across the light fabric of her dress. The commotion drew more attention, adding another layer of scandal to their disgrace. Later I heard through the gossips that the child had survived. Leo, with no other options, had taken a sobbing Isabel back to our hometown. But I never returned there. I stood at the gate for a long time after they were gone, watching the soldiers march in perfect formation, listening to the bugle calls that would never summon Leo again. A profound quiet settled over me. It was done. The first part of my vengeance was complete. The life he had valued above all else, the career that had been his excuse for every neglect and betrayal, was ashes. But I was not. I was still here. And my life, my own life, was just beginning. I turned my back on the military compound and walked into the bustling city, towards a future that was mine and mine alone to shape. The city didn't embrace me, but it didn't spit me out either. It was indifferent, a vast machine that allowed me to find a crevice and exist within it. That was all I needed. For the first few weeks, survival was a raw, daily calculation. The money I had saved from Leo's forced allowance and my own secret hoard was a meager buffer against the city's prices. I found a rented room in a crowded hutong, a space barely larger than the side room at the Walshes, but it was mine. The walls were thin and the shared courtyard was a chaos of hanging laundry and competing radios, but the lock on the door was a profound luxury. No one could enter without my permission. My first venture into commerce was selling soy milk outside the gates of a large textile factory at dawn. I'd wake in the dark, my breath pluming in the unheated room, and fire up the small coal stove to boil the beans I had soaked the night before. The work was hard, my hands raw from scrubbing the giant pot, but it was a clean fatigue. The money I earned was mine, untainted by obligation or bitterness. In the afternoons, I shifted my location to the bustling area around the new department store. My product was hair ties, simple bands of elastic decorated with scraps of silk and ribbon I bought cheaply from tailors. I laid them out on a piece of cloth on the pavement. I learned to hawk my wares in a clear voice, to haggle with sharp-eyed city women, to keep one eye always open for the public security officers who would send me scattering with my cloth bundle. It was a hand-to-mouth existence, but it was freedom. Every coin I dropped into the tin box under my bed was a brick in the foundation of my new life. One evening, walking home past the glowing windows of the university, I saw a notice pinned to a board. Evening classes, literacy and high school equivalency. I stood there for a long time, my fingers stained with soy milk and dye, tracing the elegant characters. The memory of Liam's mocking laughter and Clara's contemptuous words. "With your handwriting, you can't even form the letters properly," echoed in my mind. They had used my lack of education as a cudgel to keep me in my place. The next day I used a full week's earnings to pay the enrollment fee. That night I sat on the floor of my room, a brand new notebook and a textbook on basic mathematics open before me. The characters swam before my eyes. My hand, so capable with a sickle or a rolling pin, felt clumsy and stupid holding a pencil. A wave of despair washed over me. Was I a fool? A country woman pretending to be something she wasn't? But then I remembered the cold emptiness of my death, the numb ache of my first life. This struggle, this frustration was a gift. I clenched my jaw and pressed the pencil to the paper, forming the strokes again and again until my fingers cramped. I would not be defeated by a piece of paper. Months bled into a year. My life became a relentless cycle. Dawn at the factory gate, afternoon at the department store, evening in a classroom filled with other hopeful, tired faces. I existed on a few hours of sleep and a fierce, burning determination. I learned about algebra and history. I read poetry that spoke of landscapes far beyond Pine Creek Village. I discovered a mind within myself that I never knew existed, one that could analyze and reason and dream. The jasmine tree outside my rented room bloomed, its scent sweetening the dusty air. On that day the postman handed me a thick, official-looking envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. There it was, a single sheet of paper that felt heavier than any sack of grain I had ever carried. It was an admission letter. From Peking University. The School of International Relations. I sank onto my doorstep, the paper trembling in my hands. I stared at the golden embossed seal until it blurred, hot tears finally falling, not of bitterness but of a stunned, disbelieving joy. They soaked into the paper, smudging nothing. It was real. On the day of the opening ceremony, I wore a new white shirt, bought with money from selling hair ties. It was the finest garment I had ever owned. I sat in the last row of the vast auditorium, a speck among hundreds of new students. They were so young, so bright-eyed, chattering in a confident Mandarin that still sometimes felt foreign on my tongue. I felt 1,000 years old, my soul lined with the scars of 2 lifetimes. A hush fell over the crowd as a young man took the stage to deliver a welcome speech on behalf of the student union. His voice was calm and clear, his Mandarin perfect and elegant. He spoke of global currents and national rejuvenation, concepts that felt as distant as the moon a year ago. My eyes were drawn to him. He had a thoughtful, intelligent face, and his eyes, behind a pair of simple gold-rimmed glasses, scanned the audience with a gentle authority. His gaze seemed to linger on our section for a moment, and I quickly looked down at my hands, suddenly self-conscious. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled out into the sun-drenched courtyard. I was fumbling in my bag for my class schedule when my pen slipped from my fingers and rolled across the flagstones. "Miss, you dropped your pen." The voice was familiar. I looked up. It was him, the young man from the stage. He bent down, his movement graceful, and picked it up. He held it out to me, and in that moment our fingers brushed. I accepted it, my heart doing a strange, nervous flutter. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, and his eyes, up close, were as gentle as flowing water. "I'm Ethan Cole. Welcome to Peking University." Before I could stammer a reply, he was swept away by a group of fellow students. I stood there, clutching the pen, the spot where his fingers had touched mine feeling strangely warm. In the days that followed, Ethan Cole seemed to be everywhere. He was always there, a quiet, steady presence in the vast silence of the library. I would look up from a dense text on geopolitical theory, my head spinning, and find him a few tables away, immersed in his own books. He never bothered me, never made a show of it. But once, when I returned from a brief trip to the water fountain, I found a piece of precious white rabbit milk candy sitting neatly in my enamel mug. Another time I was working my part-time job at the university cafeteria, my arms aching from carrying heavy trays, when I heard a familiar voice at the window. "One jiaozi, please." It was Ethan. He took the plate, his gaze warm. "Maya, don't let your hands shake," he said softly with a hint of a smile before turning away. He knew my name. Sometimes when I opened my textbook late at night in my room, I would find neat handwritten notes in the margins beside the most complex passages. His script was confident and clear, illuminating concepts that had baffled me. He never signed them, but I knew. They were always signed with a simple E. It was both thrilling and terrifying. His attention felt like a spotlight, illuminating a version of myself I was still afraid to believe in. The part of me that was Maya Walsh, the beaten-down village wife, whispered that this was a mistake, that I was an imposter in this hallowed world, and he would soon see the truth. This internal turmoil came to a head one afternoon. I was studying in a secluded corner of the library when a small folded slip of paper fell from between the pages of my book. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Maya, tonight at 7 by Weiming Lake, would you do me the honor of discussing the U.S. President's upcoming China visit with me?" Ethan. Panic, cold and immediate, seized me. Discuss geopolitics? With him? He was the academic star of the department, and I was a woman who, until recently, could barely write her own name. He saw a fellow student. I knew I was a fraud carrying a secret, shameful past. I tucked the note back into the book and avoided the library, the cafeteria, any place I might see him for 3 straight days. On the 4th afternoon, as I hurried behind the classroom building, a figure stepped out from the shadow of a flowering crab apple tree, its petals scattering around him like pink snow. It was Ethan. He blocked my path, his expression unreadable. "Maya," he said bluntly, his gaze direct. "What are you afraid of?" The question was so simple, so piercing, it stripped away all my defenses. I clutched the faded, worn hem of my blouse, a stark contrast to his clean, pressed trousers. "Ethan," I whispered, the words tearing from a place of deep shame. "We're not from the same world. Do you even know that I've been married before?" There. I had said it. I had laid my greatest shame at his feet. I expected shock, disgust, a hurried retreat. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and bolted, leaving him standing in a path strewn with fallen blossoms, my heart cracking with a pain I hadn't anticipated. The next morning, heavy with a sense of finality, I walked to my early lecture. As I approached the hall, I saw a figure standing under the large parasol tree in the courtyard. The damp morning mist had soaked the cuffs of his trousers dark. It was clear he had been waiting for a long time. It was Ethan. He stepped forward, blocking my path, his eyes behind those gold-rimmed glasses shining with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Maya," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "So what if you were married?" I stared at him, stunned into silence. "That only proves," he continued, his gaze holding mine, "that you once loved the wrong person. Or that circumstances forced you into a path you didn't choose. It doesn't define you. It doesn't diminish you." The books in my arms trembled. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering patches of light across his face. "Do you know what you're like?" he said softly, his voice full of a wonder that undid me completely. "You're like a fern growing in the desert. Even in the harshest conditions, with no water and relentless sun, you still found a way to grow tall and proud. I read your midterm essay, The Geopolitical Analysis of Southeast Asia." Professor Wong praised it in the staff room. He said your assessment of the Malacca Strait was highly predictive. His words were a balm, a validation I hadn't known I craved. They weren't about my past, but about my mind, my potential. His voice was gentle yet resolute. "Don't let the past chain you down, Maya. You deserve everything beautiful in this world." I stood frozen, his words unlocking a floodgate. Memories I had tried to bury rushed back. My father lifting my younger brother high. "What use is it for a girl to study?" Eleanor Walsh's bitter sneer. "You think you're fit to be my daughter-in-law?" Clara's arrogant words. "You're not even worthy to carry Isabel's shoes." Tears I could no longer control blurred my vision. So it turned out, in someone else's eyes, I could be worthy. I could be seen as something good. "Don't cry," Ethan murmured, fumbling in his pocket for a handkerchief and knocking over the pile of books I was holding. We both crouched down at the same time to pick them up, and our foreheads bumped with a soft, dull thud. A wet laugh bubbled out of me, mingling with my tears. He rubbed his forehead, a chuckle rumbling in his own chest. Then he stood, took a half step back, grew serious, and held out his hand as if we were meeting for the first time. Ethan Cole, School of International Relations. The warm morning sun fell on my shoulders. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, at the sincere, hopeful light in his eyes. Slowly, tentatively, I placed my hand in his. Maya, I said, my voice gaining strength. Freshman. School of International Relations. His hand was warm and firm around mine. A spring wind rustled through the large leaves of the parasol tree. From the distance, the library bell rang, clear and bright. A new day had truly begun. The world, which had for a glorious year been reduced to the manageable dimensions of textbooks, lecture halls, and Ethan's steadying presence, suddenly yawned open again, threatening to swallow me whole. It happened on an ordinary autumn afternoon, the kind where the golden sunlight stains the rows of parasol trees and the air holds the first crisp hint of coming winter. I was hugging my borrowed copy of Principles of International Law to my chest, walking out through the university's main gate, my mind still tangled in the complexities of maritime sovereignty. Then I heard it. A coarse, gratingly familiar voice that sliced through the refined academic chatter like a rusty saw. Miss. Hey miss. Do you know which class Maya is in? My blood ran cold. I didn't need to look up to know. It was my father's voice, roughened by a lifetime of shouting across fields and cheap liquor. I forced my head up, and there they were, a trio of ghosts from my darkest memories, huddled just beyond the gate like wolves at the edge of a firelight. My father stood, his posture permanently stooped from labor, his hands, caked with the ingrained dirt that no amount of washing could ever remove, clutching the strap of a worn satchel. My mother, her face a roadmap of bitterness and hardship, clutched the same faded green cloth bag she had once used to carry the money from selling me off to the highest bidder. And my younger brother, Kai, crouched at the curb, a cigarette dangling from his lips, flicking ashes onto the pristine pavement with a deliberate contempt. They were stopping students at random, my father's rough grasp on a young woman's arm making her flinch. Do you know Maya? Which class is she in? A cold fury, colder than the numbness of my death, rose within me. They had found me. The vultures had scented a new source of carrion. I strode forward, my footsteps silent on the pavement. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice low and taut. My father's head snapped around. His eyes, small and piggish, lit up with a predatory glee. Maya. He seized my wrist, his grip like iron, his dirty nails digging into my skin. You passed into Peking University and didn't even tell us. Your own family. An hour later they were crowded into my tiny rented room, a space that had been my sanctuary and now felt violently violated. The air, usually scented with old books and jasmine from the courtyard, was thick with the smell of sweat and tobacco. My mother shoved Kai toward me. Call your sister. Someday you'll need her help when you marry a wife. Her tone was wheedling, transactional. I was not a daughter. I was an asset that had unexpectedly appreciated in value. I shook my father's hand off my arm, the ghost of his grip a brand on my skin. Didn't he already get married 5 years ago? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Or did the bride price you got for me not cover the cost? Kai ground his cigarette butt onto the clean floorboards near my feet, his eyes flashing with the same unearned entitlement I remembered. That was then. A man has ongoing needs. You're at Peking University now. You have connections. You can get me a city job. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. I had only meant to warn him that day, I said, the memory of Kai's wedding, paid for with the money from my own sale, surfacing with painful clarity. Yet he dared to walk away from me when I tried. Fine, I said, the plan forming in my mind instantly, cold and clear. Then come with me. I led them back to my room. I needed to contain this, to deal with it on my own terms, away from the prying eyes of the university. What I didn't expect was to find Ethan there. He was sitting at my small table, busy helping me organize a stack of internship application papers from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, an opportunity he had quietly helped me secure. He looked up as we entered, his warm expression freezing into one of polite confusion as he took in the 3 bedraggled, hostile figures trailing me. Ethan, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. Can you close the door for me? He hesitated for only a second, reading the storm in my eyes. He gave a curt nod, stacked his documents neatly and closed the door with a definitive click. The moment the latch slid home, the atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming charged and dangerous. I didn't have a firewood stick, but I had a long, sturdy feather duster I used for the high corners. I swung it not to strike but to warn, the whoosh of air making Kai flinch and stumble back against the wall. My father lunged, his face purpling with rage. You ungrateful brat. But I was no longer the tied-up girl he could bully. I slipped aside, using the duster to keep a safe distance between us. My mother shrieked and rushed forward, her hands claw-like. I twisted her wrist just enough to make her yelp and retreat, holding her off without causing real injury. The next few minutes were a chaotic, silent ballet of violence. The swish of the duster, the thud of bodies against walls, their angry shouts and curses, all contained within the four walls of my tiny apartment. I was a whirlwind, using their own momentum against them, my movements fueled by a lifetime of repressed rage. I was not just fighting them, I was fighting the ghost of the girl I had been. After a while they were all panting, cornered, and staring at me with a mixture of fear and shock. I sank into my one chair, my own chest heaving, the feather duster still clenched in my white-knuckled hand. Ethan, who had watched the entire scene with a stunned, horrified silence, wordlessly handed me a glass of water. I drained it in one go. Who? I asked, my voice rasping. Told you to come here? It was Kai who broke, his bravado shattered. He stammered nervously, unable to meet my eyes. Sis, you've made it now. We just came to remind you not to forget us. And then in an instant the memory flashed before my eyes. A month earlier I had seen Clara at a shopping mall. Her arm was linked with one of the thugs from that alley, the one whose knee she had shattered with a pole. I had wanted to step forward, to warn her, to pull her away from the life of petty crime and bitterness she was clearly heading toward. But the moment our eyes met, the hatred in her gaze was so pure, so venomous, it had frozen me in my tracks. She had rushed at me then, jabbing her finger in my face, screaming for the whole mall to hear. Maya. My brother has already suffered enough because of you. Haven't you done enough? You wrecked his career, you drove away Isabel, and now you want to wreck our family too? Just stay away from us. I had turned my back then, choosing with a heavy heart to respect her decision and her hatred. She had made her choice. And now her bitterness had led her to do this. She must have tracked me down and sent my family, like a poison-tipped arrow, straight into the heart of my new life. Get out, I said to my family, my voice now eerily calm. If you ever come near me again, I will not be so gentle. I will go to the Public Security Bureau and tell them you are harassing a student of Peking University. See how long you last in the city then. They scrambled to their feet, cowed and furious but defeated. They filed out of my room without another word, leaving behind the stench of their presence and a crushing silence. Ethan was still standing by the door, his face pale. He looked at me as if he was truly seeing me for the first time, not just the diligent student, but the survivor, the fighter, the woman forged in a fire he could scarcely imagine. Maya, he began, his voice full of unasked questions. I told you, I whispered, the adrenaline fading, leaving me trembling and exposed. I told you we were from different worlds. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before my chair, taking my still trembling hands in his. His grip was firm, anchoring. No, he said, his gaze unwavering. You told me you had a past. You didn't tell me you were a lioness. 3 months later, the memory of that day had been relegated to a dark corner of my mind, a battle won. Ethan and I stood side by side with 3 other new interns in a grand, echoing hallway of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, gleaming against the brand-new employee badge pinned to my chest. My name, Maya, was printed in bold, clean letters. It felt like a suit of armor. During the lunch break, I picked up a copy of the legal daily someone had left in the break room. A headline on an inside page caught my eye and my breath hitched. Tragic murder-suicide in Pine Creek Village. Scandal involving soldier and martyr's widow ends in bloodshed. My eyes scanned the brief article. It detailed a domestic dispute between one Leo Walsh, a dishonorably discharged former soldier, and his companion Isabel Croft. An argument over money, the shame of their situation, the struggle with the child. It had ended with Leo turning a knife on Isabel before taking his own life. I folded the newspaper shut, my hands steady. I stared out the window at the relentless flow of traffic along Chang'an Avenue, the great artery of the nation. There was no satisfaction, only a profound, hollow finality. The last thread tying me to that old life had been severed not by my hand, but by the same bitterness and dysfunction that had created it. Then I suddenly turned and threw my arms around Ethan, who was standing beside me, a cup of warm milk in his hand for me. He stiffened in surprise for a second, then his free arm came around me, holding me gently. "Maya, what's wrong?" he murmured into my hair. I buried my face in the clean woolen scent of his jacket. "It feels so good," I whispered, the words muffled but fervent, "to have you here." He held me tighter. "No, Maya," he said, his voice soft but sure. "It's having you that makes everything good." I pulled back slightly and looked at our reflection in the vast glass window. Our silhouettes were framed against the bustling modern city. The sunlight spilled over his shoulders, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, not fear, but a deep, unwavering respect. And in that reflection, for the first time, I saw not a victim, not a seeker of vengeance, but a woman standing tall, her future blazing bright before her, finally free. The news of Leo and Isabel's end was a final, grim footnote in a book I had already closed. There was no room in my new life for their ghosts. The hollow feeling their story evoked was quickly filled by the relentless, thrilling pace of my present. My internship at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not merely a job. It was an immersion into a world of intricate protocols and global currents. I started in the archives, a place most interns found dull, but to me it was a treasure trove. I devoured decades of diplomatic cables and reports, cross-referencing them with my university studies. The theoretical concepts from my textbooks, balance of power, economic interdependence, suddenly had weight and texture, illustrated by the faded ink and official seals of history. Ethan, working in a different department, would meet me after work. Our walks home were no longer just about us. They were vibrant, sprawling debates on the day's developments. He would challenge my interpretations, and I would counter with insights from the raw, unfiltered documents I'd processed. We were intellectual partners, our minds sharpening against each other. "Your assessment of the Southeast Asian fisheries dispute," he said one evening, his breath misting in the cold air. "The one you wrote for Professor Wong." I heard a senior official cite a similar line of reasoning in a briefing today. He didn't know its origins. A flush of pride, warm and clean, spread through me. It was a different kind of validation than Ethan's personal affection. It was professional respect, earned in an arena where my past was irrelevant and my mind was everything. After 6 months, I was moved from the archives to the Department of Asian Affairs. My first real task was to compile a background dossier on a visiting trade delegation. It was meticulous, unglamorous work, but I treated it with the same life-or-death seriousness I had once applied to surviving the Walsh household. I worked late, cross-checking every fact, anticipating questions my superiors might not yet have thought to ask. The day of the delegation's arrival, I was tasked with standing by in the conference room, a silent junior presence ready to fetch documents or clarify minor points. The meeting was conducted in a mix of Mandarin and the delegation's language, which I had been studying feverishly. Halfway through, one of the delegates made a nuanced comment, a subtle cultural reference that the official interpreter translated too literally, losing its strategic implication. Without thinking, acting on an instinct honed by 1,000 hours of study, I scribbled a note on a piece of paper and slid it discreetly to the head of our delegation, Director Chen. He read it, his expression unchanged, but when he next spoke, he subtly incorporated the clarified meaning into his response. The delegate from the other side nodded, a look of genuine understanding passing between them. The tension in the room eased. After the meeting, Director Chen lingered as the room cleared. He picked up my note, his eyes, sharp and assessing, finally landing on me. "You are the intern?" "Violin." "Yes, Director. Your note was correct. How did you know?" "I've been studying their regional folk tales, sir." The reference was to a parable about a foolish farmer who mistakes a fox's cunning for wisdom. The delegate was implying our initial proposal was clever but short-sighted. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "See that you continue your studies, Intern Lin." That small, silent victory was more potent than any dramatic confrontation. It was a testament to my new identity. Maya Lin, the analyst, the linguist, the one who paid attention. Meanwhile, my life with Ethan deepened into a comfortable, profound partnership. We moved into a slightly larger apartment, a place with bookshelves that overflowed onto the floor and a small kitchen where we learned to cook together, our attempts often ending in laughter and makeshift meals. The shadows of my past receded not because I forgot them, but because the present was so brilliantly, demandingly bright. One weekend we were visiting an art exhibition, a modern display that I found bewildering but Ethan explained with patient enthusiasm. As we stood before a sprawling canvas of abstract color, I felt a familiar, unwelcome prickle on the back of my neck. I turned. Across the room, surrounded by a group of chattering, well-dressed friends, was Clara. She looked different. The village plumpness had been replaced by a city sharpness. Her clothes were fashionable but cheaply made and her makeup was a little too heavy. Her laugh was too loud a performance. Her eyes met mine and for a second the performance dropped. The raw, corrosive hatred I had seen at the mall was still there, undimmed by time or distance. Then she deliberately turned her back, linking arms with the man beside her, the same thug from the alley now wearing a cheap suit, and led her group away in a cloud of forced gaiety. Ethan followed my gaze. "Do you know her?" "A ghost," I said softly, turning back to the painting. "Just a ghost." She was a reminder that the past could never be fully erased, only outgrown. And I was outgrowing it at a dizzying speed. A year turned into 2. I graduated from Peking University with highest honors, the ceremony a blur of applause and proud handshakes. Ethan was there, his camera flashing, his face beaming with a pride that rivaled my own. My internship turned into a junior officer position. I was given my own small desk, my own responsibilities. I started to travel with delegations, first domestically, then momentously on a short trip to a neighboring country. Sitting in a conference room in Bangkok, listening to the buzz of languages and helping to navigate the delicate dance of diplomacy, I felt a sense of belonging so complete it was almost disorienting. This was my world now. The smell of burning wood and the taste of bitter resignation were memories from someone else's life. One evening, shortly after my return, Ethan and I were walking through our favorite park. The cherry blossoms were in full, extravagant bloom, their petals drifting down like pink snow. He stopped me under a particularly magnificent tree. "Maya," he said, his voice unusually solemn. He wasn't holding a ring, that wasn't his style. Instead he pulled a small flat box from his pocket. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a simple, elegant key. "The lease is signed," he said, his eyes locked on mine, full of a quiet, certain love. "It's a small house not far from here. With a garden. Room for more bookshelves. A place to build a life, a real one. Together." I looked from the key to his face, from the symbol of a stable, rooted future to the man who had never once flinched from the storm of my past. The fern in the desert had not just survived. It had been transplanted to rich soil, had been watered with kindness, and was now blooming under a benevolent sun. I took the key. It was cool and solid in my palm, heavier than any admission letter or official badge. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a vow, a promise not just to him but to myself. Together. The move to the little house was a celebration. Our friends from the university and the ministry came, filling the rooms with laughter and music. It was a world away from the silent, resentful household I had once known. This was a home built on choice, on mutual respect, on love. As the last guest left and the quiet of the night settled around us, I stood in the doorway of our new home, looking out at the small, moonlit garden. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Are you happy, Maya?" he whispered. I leaned back into his solid warmth, watching a lone cherry blossom petal drift slowly to the ground. The journey had been brutal, the cost immense. But here now, in the quiet of this earned peace, with the man I loved and a future I had clawed for myself stretching out before me, the answer was simple and true. "Yes," I said, turning in his arms to face him. "For the first time in both my lives, I am truly, completely happy." The past was a closed book. My story was just beginning. The little house with the garden became the anchor of my universe. It was a place of quiet mornings with tea and newspapers, of evenings filled with the soft scratch of Ethan's pen and the rustle of my own reports. We planted a jasmine vine by the door, and its scent, sweeter and more potent than the one from my rented room, greeted me every day, a personal testament to how far I had come. At the ministry, My career was no longer that of a promising intern but of a respected junior analyst. Director Chen, a man of few words and high standards, became a taciturn mentor. He began assigning me to more sensitive briefs, often involving the complex economic and territorial disputes in Southeast Asia, my area of academic focus. I was no longer just compiling information. I was helping to shape it, drafting sections of position papers that would eventually land on the desks of ministers. The work was all-consuming, but it was a different kind of exhaustion than I had ever known. It was mental, not physical. It was the fatigue of creation, not of survival. I thrived on it. One afternoon, Director Chen called me into his office. A senior delegation was preparing for a critical series of talks, and the briefing packet was a mess of contradictory reports and outdated intelligence. "Lin," he said, pushing a towering stack of files toward me. "This is a dog's breakfast. I need it coherent, accurate, and predictive. You have 48 hours. It was an immense task, a test of not just my analytical skills but my stamina and judgment. I didn't flinch. "Understood, Director." For 2 days and 2 nights, I lived in a small windowless conference room at the ministry. I cross-referenced economic data with satellite imagery, read between the lines of diplomatic cables, and drafted concise summaries. Ethan brought me food and a clean blouse, kissing my forehead without a word, understanding the stakes. On the morning of the 3rd day, I placed a neatly bound 100-page briefing book on Director Chen's desk. My eyes were gritty with fatigue but my mind was clear. He spent an hour reading it in silence. Finally he looked up. "The section on the maritime claims. Your conclusion is more assertive than the consensus." "The consensus is based on a 1985 treaty, sir," I said, my voice steady. "The ground-level economic activity, which I've correlated with shipping manifests and local infrastructure projects, tells a different, more aggressive story. The consensus is outdated." He grunted, a sound I had learned was his highest form of praise. "The delegation leaves tomorrow. You will accompany them as a junior advisor." This was it. The real thing. Not an observation post but a seat at the table, however small. The talks were held in a gleaming air-conditioned conference center in Singapore, a world away from the dust of Pine Creek. I sat slightly behind the lead negotiators, my role to whisper clarifications, to pass notes, to be the repository of the facts we had built. During a tense afternoon session, the other side presented a new, seemingly benign proposal regarding fishing rights. The head of our delegation, Minister Lee, was about to acknowledge it when the data from my briefing book flashed in my mind. That proposal, if accepted, would have ceded de facto control over a strategically critical channel. I scribbled a note and passed it to Minister Lee. He read it, his expression never changing, but he subtly shifted his line of questioning, probing the implications with a new, sharpened focus. The delegation on the other side became flustered, their answers evasive. The proposal was tabled. After the session, Minister Lee turned to me as we gathered our papers. "That was well caught, Advisor Lin," he said quietly. "Your briefing book was correct." The victory was silent, invisible to anyone outside that room, but it resonated through me with the force of a physical blow. I had not just done my job, I had protected my country's interests. I had used the mind I had fought so hard to educate. When I returned to Beijing, there was a new respect in the way my colleagues looked at me. I was no longer Ethan Cole's bright girlfriend or the intern from the countryside. I was Advisor Lin. Life with Ethan settled into a rhythm of profound, quiet understanding. We hosted small dinners for friends, debates over world affairs flowing as freely as the wine. We traveled when we could, and I saw the places I had only read about in books. The bustling ports of Hong Kong, the ancient temples of Kyoto. With every new experience, the ghost of Maya Walsh receded, her voice growing fainter, until one day I realized I could no longer clearly remember the feel of the firewood stick in my hand or the specific timbre of Eleanor's shrieking. They had been overwritten, replaced by the weight of a diplomatic passport and the sound of Ethan's laughter. One Sunday we were browsing in a used book market when I saw her again. Clara. She was alone, looking thin and frayed, picking through a bin of discounted romance novels. The cheap glamour was gone, replaced by a dull resignation. She saw me at the same moment. There was no hatred this time, only a vast, empty weariness. She looked at my wool coat, my leather satchel, the intelligent, calm man standing beside me, and then back at her own hands, chapped and clutching a tattered book. The chasm between us was no longer just emotional. It was a gulf of class, of accomplishment, of life. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, not in denial but in defeat. Then she turned and melted into the crowd, a shadow dispelled by the morning sun. I felt a pang not of guilt but of a sorrowful finality. I had offered her a hand once and she had chosen to bite it. There was nothing more to be done. Her path was hers to walk as mine was mine. That night I lay awake next to Ethan listening to his steady breathing. I thought of Clara, of Leo and Isabel, of the entire tangled mess of my first life. The desire for vengeance that had once been my lifeblood had long since evaporated, its purpose served. It had been the fuel for my escape, but it was not a foundation for a life. I had built something better, something real. I had a career I was proud of. I had a home filled with love and respect. I had a self that was my own creation. The little girl whose father said she was useless, the young woman whose in-laws treated her as a beast of burden, the betrayed wife who died of a broken heart. They were all part of me, but they were no longer me. I had integrated them, acknowledged their pain, and then built a citadel of a life upon the ruins they had left. The journey was over. The war was won. Now there was only the peaceful, challenging, and exhilarating work of living. Years have a way of softening the sharpest edges of memory. The past no longer feels like a separate life, but more like a deeply buried geological layer, the intense pressure of which formed the person I am today. I am no longer Maya who was reborn. I am simply Maya. My career at the ministry did not follow a meteoric rise, but a steady, ascending path built on competence and reliability. I never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight of responsibility eventually found me. I was appointed Deputy Director of the Office of Southeast Asian Affairs, a role that suited my analytical nature perfectly. I led a small team of bright young minds and I took a quiet pride in mentoring them, in being the kind of guide I never had. I ensured their insights were heard, their contributions recognized. I would not be the source of anyone's silenced potential. The work remained demanding, a constant negotiation of interests and personalities, but the frantic urgency of my early years had mellowed into a seasoned confidence. I had earned my place at the table. At home, the garden I had once viewed as a symbol of impossible stability became my sanctuary. Ethan and I spent weekends there, our hands in the soil, tending to the roses and the vegetables with the same care we gave our relationship. We had built a life not on grand passion, but on a profound and enduring friendship. He had seen me at my most broken and my most fierce, and he had never wavered. Our love was the quiet, sturdy bedrock of my existence. We never had children. It was a conscious choice, one we discussed at length. My life, my energy had already been spent raising other people's children, Leo's siblings. The maternal part of me had been exhausted in that first, thankless life. We were content with our world of books, travel, and each other. It was a completeness that defied traditional expectations, and it was ours. One autumn, on the anniversary of my admission to Peking University, I received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, spidery, and uncertain. It was from Pine Creek Village, but not from my blood family. It was from Auntie Zhang, the tofu seller. Dear Maya Lin, it began, the formality touching a chord of sadness in me. I hope this letter finds you well. You are a legend here, you know. The girl who got away and became a great official in Beijing. People still talk about it, usually when scolding their own lazy daughters. I smiled faintly, imagining the scene. I write with sad news, the letter continued. Your mother passed last month. Your father followed not long after. Sickness. Your brother, Kai he left the village after the funeral. No one knows where he is. I set the letter down on my polished desk, looking out the window at the Beijing skyline. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no schadenfreude. They were simply facts, the final closing of a book whose story had ended for me long ago. They were people I had known once in another lifetime. I felt a distant pity for the hard, small lives they had led, but it was a detached emotion, like reading about strangers in a newspaper. I did not go back for the graves. There was nothing for me there. Instead, I made a small donation in their names to a charity that supported rural girls' education. It was the only epitaph I could offer, a silent prayer that another girl from a village like Pine Creek might have an easier path than mine. Time flowed on, a gentle, relentless river. Ethan's hair turned a distinguished silver at the temples, and fine lines etched themselves around my eyes, lines of laughter and concentration, not of worry and fear. We traveled the world together, not as part of a delegation but as ourselves. We stood on the cliffs of Ireland, walked through the ruins of Rome, and sailed on a junk in Halong Bay. With every new horizon, the world that had once felt so small and suffocating expanded, and my place in it felt more right, more earned. On my 50th birthday, Ethan and I were back in our garden. The jasmine was in bloom, scenting the evening air. He handed me a small flat package. Inside was a leather-bound book. It was blank. "For your story," he said softly. "The one you've never written." I ran my hand over the smooth cover. I had thought about it over the years, of pouring the pain and the triumph onto paper. But I never had. The act of living had been narrative enough. "I don't need to write it down, Ethan," I said, looking at him, my partner, my anchor. "I've been living it. Every day. And it's a better story than I ever could have imagined." He took my hand, his grip still firm. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his voice gentle. "All the struggle?" I looked around me, at the beautiful, quiet house, at the thriving garden, at the man who had shared my journey. I thought of the respect I commanded in my work, of the mind I had cultivated, of the peace that sat in my soul like a deep, still lake. The journey had been brutal. The cost had been nearly everything. But the woman I had become, the life I had built, it was all so much more than the wounded, vengeful girl of 1987 could have ever dreamed possible. I squeezed his hand, my heart full to bursting with a quiet, unshakable joy. "Yes," I said, and the word was a final, peaceful benediction on both my lives. It was all worth it. The sun dipped below the wall, casting long shadows across the lawn. The story was over. The life, my beautiful, hard-won life, went on. The end.